Hey, it's Brent. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been listening. The first 10 episodes have been downloaded nearly 5,500 times. That's an amazing number for a small independent podcast like this. So thank you so much for the support. Coming up, election fever. Looks like someone needs a bunch of doctors. And a Belizean rocks the red carpet in Venice.
You're listening to Brent's 2 Cents, the semi-serious thoughts of a guy in Belize. And now here's the host of this podcast from somewhere in Belize City, Brent Toombs.
Hey, welcome to the podcast for the week of September the 14th. I hope you're enjoying the mostly virtual September celebrations. You know, if there's a silver lining, I think it's that local artists are more prominent in the celebrations this year than they've been in at least a decade, maybe 2 decades. So kudos to everyone who's not only found a way to keep the party going despite social distancing and a state of emergency, but also for making Belizean talent a much bigger part of our national celebration. Okay, on with the podcast. I guess it's inevitable when the deadline to transfer voter registration and the deadline for new registrations before the next general election coincide at almost the same time. But it sure looks like Election and Boundaries may be vying with the Lands Department for that dubious title of being a hotbed of corruption. Now, in the second episode of this podcast, I spoke at length about the shenanigans that take place every July and August as politicians try to stack the voters list in their constituencies with phantom voters. And the summer of 2020 was no exception. For example, 14 people got registered at one house on Burns Avenue in San Ignacio. Now, you would think that this would be a pretty easy situation to challenge, right? I mean, there's no way that 14 adults with different surnames all live in a single family home. And someone did challenge it, except they never showed up at court. And the challenge was struck down. And this scenario was repeated in electoral divisions all over Belize. And then there's a special period of voter list tampering that takes place in the months right before every general election, when suddenly scores of new Belizeans are sworn in as citizens just in time to get registered to vote. Well, COVID-19 has definitely thrown a wrench into that. And what is usually an advantage for the ruling party has been put on ice by the pandemic. I don't think there's been a swearing-in ceremony since at least January of this year. And then there is another pool of potential voters that also got derailed by the pandemic. That's the Belizean Americans who were scrubbed from the list during re-registration in 2018. I have no doubt that more than a few intended to get themselves back on the voters list in time for the general election. And don't forget that Seti Elrington basically invited them to do just that when he said, "Nobody checks," in reference to non-residents registering to vote. But with the airport being closed since April, any Belizean American who was waiting until their annual summer vacation to register has missed the window of opportunity. You see, there is a cycle for registering voters. On the 10th of each month, or in the case of September, the 11th, the list for that cycle is closed, and Elections and Boundaries must post the temporary or supplemental registration list by the 15th of that month. At that point, any person who lives in that division can challenge additions to the voters list. A registration court will then hear those challenges sometime near the end of the month. And as I explained in episode 2 of this podcast, those challenges almost never succeed. But once all the challenges have been heard, Elections and Boundaries has until the 5th of the following month to officially post the revised voters list for each division. So anyone who didn't register by September 11th possibly won't be able to vote in the 2020 general election. I say possibly because until the Prime Minister calls the election, we don't know for certain when it will be. But also because if Election and Boundaries wanted to, they could work just a tiny bit quicker and still be able to post the revised voters list before November 4th, which, if that is election day, would mean that anyone who registers up until October 10th could actually vote in the general election. And that is something to consider if we suddenly see a mass swearing in of new Belizeans or a rush from the airport to Election and Boundaries after October 1st. But regardless, I think a lot of electoral incumbents and aspirants are feeling uneasy that they've not been able to manipulate the voters lists in their constituencies as they normally do. Remember, in 2015, there were 7 races decided by less than 100 votes. So every name added to the list that is loyal to your party matters. Big time. And that's driven political operators to get very creative about finding anyone they believe they can depend on to deliver votes in their favor. One such source of newfound franchise exercisers is the Central American Health Sciences University, a medical school for foreign students located in Ladyville, in the heart of Belize Rural Central, a division held by the UDP's Beverly Williams. Now, what makes this medical school suddenly so valuable to any politician is that most of the students are from India and Pakistan, which are both Commonwealth countries. And the election law in Belize allows for any citizen of a Commonwealth country who lives in Belize for 12 months to register to vote. Now, that law is a vestige of colonial days and was intended so the English masters could vote. It was never intended for visitors or students. But it is the law. And so technically, there's nothing illegal about a student from Pakistan or India who is only in Belize temporarily registering to vote. Yeah, it's not illegal, but it stinks of corruption. In 2015, Beverly Williams defeated the PUP's Dolores Balderramas Garcia by only 52 votes. 52. Any sitting area representative is going to lose some support during their term in office. It's inevitable. Not everyone is going to be happy with you, and there will always be some previous supporters who will be disappointed and will flip their support to your opponent. So it's very important in these closely contested constituencies to find new support wherever and from whomever you can. Adding a reported 60 Indian or Pakistani students to your tally is massive in a division that you only won by 52 votes 5 years ago. Now, there is no way in hell you can convince me that these students just decided on their own that they wanted to take advantage of an old colonial law and went as a group to Election and Boundaries at the 11th hour to register to vote. Like, they just got through cutting up a cadaver, and for shits and giggles, a bunch of them said, "Hey, let's go register to vote in a country where our status is temporary." No. Without a doubt, what happened was these students were enticed to register, either by their school or by a politician. But someone convinced them to register. And the images captured on the news last week of a UDP operator holding those students' passports and fast-tracking them to the front of the line at a very busy registration office suggests it was Beverly Williams or her campaign who orchestrated everything. And what makes this situation stink even worse is that Beverly Williams, who is the Minister of State in the Ministry of Immigration, is the person who signs off on student visas. So if you're a foreign student and you get a request to register to vote and then to consider voting for that particular politician who just happens to decide whether you remain in Belize long enough to become a doctor, well, what are you going to do? Now, of course, the PUP is not happy. But privately, they're probably kicking themselves that they didn't think of recruiting those foreign students first. But regardless, Dolores Balderramas Garcia was on the news last week stating that her party will close this loophole if they win the general elections. But they won't. No party has yet to make any significant election reforms after becoming government. By 2025 or whenever the next election happens, there will be a fresh set of Indian and Pakistani medical students all eligible to vote. And if the PUP are looking to win a second term at that time, they're not going to give up the same advantage the UDP enjoys today. Now, I have no doubt that the PUP will at least challenge these registrations at the end of September, and no doubt they will lose, because there's nothing illegal about Commonwealth nationals who have been living in Belize for at least 12 months registering to vote. Unless, instead of challenging the voters list, they challenge the representation of the People's Act, specifically the requirements to be eligible to vote. You see, in order to register to vote, you must be 18 years of age or older. You must be a citizen of Belize or be a citizen of a Commonwealth country who has ordinarily resided in Belize for at least 12 months. And that's what should be challenged: the definition of ordinarily resident. Belizean citizens who live abroad, unless they are students or are working for the government of Belize, are ineligible to be registered because they are not considered to be ordinarily resident. That's why hundreds, possibly thousands of Belizeans who live outside Belize were removed from the voters list in 2018. However, a Belizean student who lives abroad while going to school is still considered to be ordinarily resident. So a Belizean could go to school in Taiwan or India or the USA or anywhere in the world and be away from Belize for as many years as they need to complete their studies. And even if they never set foot in Belize during the entire time they are studying abroad, they are still considered to be 100% ordinarily resident in Belize for the purpose of voting. So as far as election and boundaries is concerned, you can't lose your ordinarily resident status by being a student, which makes complete sense, because anyone who lives abroad for the sole purpose of studying is only staying in that country temporarily. They have not moved to a new country to start a new life. Essentially, they are just visitors, albeit long-term visitors. And that same logic should apply to a foreign student who comes to Belize to study. No matter how long it takes to become a doctor at Central America Health Services University, those students are staying in Belize temporarily. They have not moved here. They are not putting down roots in this country. And to grant them voting rights is an exploitation of a law that was never intended to let long-term visitors participate in our elections. But it's going to take a court challenge to get a legal decision on whether or not a student can be considered ordinarily resident. And I don't know if the opposition PUP wants to spend the resources to do that, especially as they may be cutting off their opponent's nose only to spite their own face 5 years down the road.
We want to hear from you. You can find Brent's 2 Cents on Twitter and Facebook at 2 Cents Belize, or email us at podcast@oxaproductions.com. That's OXA Productions with an S.com.
You know, one of my favorite features of this podcast is the segment I call Your 2 Cents. That's when listeners like you send a voice message about anything that's on your mind. You see, even though this show is called Brent's 2 Cents, and it's mostly just me talking about whatever, I don't want the conversation to be exclusively one way. And that's why I want to do a special episode for the next episode that will drop on Independence Day, September 21st. But I need your participation to make that happen. I need you to send me a voice message about what Belize means to you. It can be a love letter to Belize or constructive criticism. Maybe share what makes you proud to call Belize your home. What's your message for other Belizeans at this time, not only for Independence Day, but as we face the challenges of COVID-19, economic difficulties, and other social issues? If you're listening from outside Belize, what's your message for those of us here at home, or for others in the diaspora? I'd love to do an entire episode with nothing more than just your 2 cents about what Belize means to you. And now it's even easier for you to send me a voice message. You can still use WhatsApp if you wish, but now there is an even easier way, and that's to simply click on the Send Me a Voice Message link that you'll find in the description for this show. So whether you're listening to this podcast on your phone or a computer, just scroll down into the show notes for this episode and click that link. It'll open a website where you'll be prompted to record and send your message. And that's it. Message recordings are limited to a duration of 90 seconds, but if you need more time, just send me an additional message and I can edit them together. It would be great if you could send me your voice message as soon as possible so I'll have enough time to include them all for the next episode of Brent's 2 cents. So please, don't wait to the last minute. Send me that message now. Well, maybe wait until you finish listening to this episode, and then send it. All right, thanks.
Forwarded to an automatic voice message system.
Hi, this is Brent. Thanks for calling the Your 2 Cents hotline. Please leave a message about anything you want to talk about after the beep.
I live in Spanish Lookout where people are legit hiding COVID from the government and injecting themselves with ivermectin as if it was a vaccine. It's crazy. I don't know if pandemics just do this to people with their heads and then just stop thinking logically. We're having a lot of COVID here. It's not safe here. People from all over the country come shop very shop. People are not following regulations here. They still got church Sunday. Cars still drive past my house. And there's a lot of shame culture here. They control people with shame. This place is crazy too. I think everywhere is a little bit crazy. But yeah, I do enjoy your podcast. You have very, very good food for thought. It's very well put together. I enjoy it very much. Me and my husband, we listen to it. So thank you for that very much. And I will try to buy you a cup of coffee.
What's on my mind? Elections are on my mind. Yes, in the height of the pandemic, in the height of preserving democracy, the elections are on my mind. I'm thinking about elections because you have organizations that have called for people not to vote unless there's land reform. You have people who have called for the population not to vote unless we redivision the constituencies to make sure that they are most in line with the constitutional regulations. We have had people, the evangelicals, call for people not to vote in elections because they do not support the Equal Opportunities Bill. And what I am thinking about is how do you preserve the integrity of a decaying democracy, in my mind, that of Belize, without jeopardizing people's health? Because voting is such a communal, such a socialization thing. And I don't think we have been discussing it. We've seen elections happen in Trinidad and Jamaica recently, and we've seen COVID-19 cases shoot up. So how is Belize going to deal with that? That is what's on my mind.
Okay, to round out the podcast, it's time for a bit of good news. And this is almost a Cinderella story. Indira Andrewin is a 21-year-old Belizean, born in Gales Point, and has lived in Punta Gorda since she was 7 years old. Well, nearly a year and a half ago, Indira responded to a casting call that was being held in Belize City for a movie called Selva Tragica, or Tragic Jungle in English, and the movie was going to be shot in Mexico. The story is based on the legend of the Ishtabai, and the director wanted to cast an actual Belizean to play the lead role of Agnes, who is from Belize, but somehow winds up on the Mexican side of the Rio Hondo in a lawless territory inhabited by chicleros in the 1920s. Now, Indira had done a bit of modeling locally, but she had no previous acting experience. But despite that, she was cast as Agnes and soon after went to Mexico to shoot a movie. Now, for 99% of people, that would probably be the end of the story. Or maybe it would be the first of a few small roles in obscure films that nobody notices. But Tragic Jungle got noticed, and so did Indira Andrewin. The film was selected to screen at the 77th annual Venice International Film Festival, which is one of the big festivals held every year. In fact, due to COVID-19, it was one of the few film festivals to take place in person rather than virtually. So this edition of the festival got even more attention than normal. And right smack in the middle of all the glitz and glamour and red carpets was Belize's own Indira Andrewin from Punta Gorda. And that's what makes this story even more remarkable. Because not only did someone with no previous acting experience star in a movie that was selected for the Venice Film Festival, but Indira was nominated for Best Actress and invited to travel to Venice to attend the festival in person. I mean, this sounds like the synopsis for a movie. Like those films where some regular guy becomes the lead singer of a big rock band or the quarterback of an NFL team. But this happened in real life. And it just happened to a 21-year-old from Toledo. And many of us watched it go down on social media last week, enjoying every photograph and every video as Indira represented Belize so beautifully at a major film festival in Italy. Now, Indira did not win the award for Best Actress, but that doesn't diminish the pride that every single Belizean feels for her right now. So thank you, Indira, for giving us all a little something extra to celebrate this September. Okay, before I go, I want to give a shout out to the Natasha Stewart podcast. Natasha keeps putting out great episodes every week, so definitely give her podcast a listen and be sure to subscribe. And any other Belizean podcasters out there, please let me know when you drop a new episode so I can give you a plug here on Brent's 2 Cents. This is not a competition. This is a movement. And the more people who listen to all our shows, the better. Because as more Belizeans begin to listen to podcasts, more Belizeans will start to create podcasts. And I really want to see that happen. So nothing but love for all my fellow Belizean podcasters. Remember, you too can be part of the Belizean podcast movement by sharing this show with at least one person who otherwise may not know about it. Word of mouth is the absolute best form of advertising. So please help to grow the audience for Brent's 2 Cents and all your favorite Belizean podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find Brent's 2 Cents on all the major platforms, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. And every episode is also uploaded to YouTube. If you like the show, please don't forget to rate it and review it, because that really helps other people to discover this podcast. You can contact me anytime on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at 2 Cents Belize. I also would love for you to leave me a voice message to use on next week's podcast. You can leave me a voice message about anything, but I especially encourage you to share your thoughts about what Belize means to you for next week's Independence Day episode. There are now 2 ways to leave voice messages, either by WhatsApp or by clicking on the Send Me a Voice Message link in the description for this show. Finally, I want to give a huge thank you to Althea, John, Ashley, and my mom, who all donated to this podcast in the past week. Hey, I'm not doing this podcast to make money, but it does cost me money to make it, to put it on the internet, and to advertise it. So if you want to help support Brent's 2 Cents, it's as easy as buying me a cup of coffee for $3 US or 6 Belize. That little bit of extra help really encourages me to keep producing this labor of love. You can find the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description for this show. And that's going to do it for episode 11 of Brent's 2 Cents. Keep on enjoying your September celebrations virtually and safely so we can get the COVID-19 situation back under control as quickly as possible. I'll have another episode for you on September 21st, but until then, please stay home as much as possible, wash your hands, wear your mask, and most importantly, be nice to each other.
Brent's 2 Cents is a presentation of OSHA Productions, Belize's affordable professional video production company.